Друзі, можемо розпочинати.
Dear friends, we can start now. Dear ladies and gentlemen who are present here physically and online, who follow us online, welcome to the open discussion of the results of the elections 2020, local elections, which actually has the topics to conflicts through the way of dialogue, which was supported by the European Union through the platform National Dialogue for Peace and Safe Integration. Actually, it was preceded, this discussion, by several events actually provided by the national platform, and one of the results of this is a report, the national unity under the conditions of the local election race, how we can actually prevent confrontation. I would like to draw attention to the word to prevent, not to avoid, not something else, but to prevent specifically. We have to work in advance, so to say, in the national platform about peace and the national reintegration, safe reintegration, which was started in February 2018, actually paid a lot of attention and pays a lot of attention in order to prevent conflicts. And if it's impossible to do, then we have somehow to find a ways how to resolve those conflicts. Very interesting results, in my opinion, were provided by those regional consultations. And actually here I would like to emphasize the word regional. Ukraine is very diverse, and in its diversity lies some kind of the regularity of what we are going to discuss here. We have on our list 7 people who are 7 speakers who are going to speak here. 3 of those you can see here physically. The remaining 4 will be in online transmission. So the time limits up to let's say 7 minutes in order to have some time to exchange our opinions, maybe on some more or less clear issues, some which have been not now discussed. And also we would like to save some time for the Q&A questions. For the online listeners or participants, we have 2 parts, one in an hour and a half, and the remaining time for the second. So I would like to give the Yulia Tyshchenko, the floor is given to Yulia Tyshchenko, coordinator, who has been coordinating, still coordinates the working group of the National Platform Dialogue for Peace and Safe Reintegration. She's going to share her opinion. Thank you very much, Andriy. Thanks to everyone who came here and who takes interest in this very interesting topic, post-election topic, but we are not going to say so much about the quantitative results, or including the trends and tendencies. We are going to discuss that issue during the second platform time, but rather we're going to talk about the challenges which can be brought about by the results of those elections, if you're talking about the issues of reintegration, unity, and the issues of peace and war. Thank you, Andriy. Indeed, we carried out some regional consultations in 16 regions with our experts involved, and actually mostly we did that in online mode. We aren't talking about the eastern part of Ukraine, western parts, the central part, southern part, northern, etc., including the city of Kyiv. That took place in 2 months, August and September. Of course, far from all the nuances could be included in this report. But anyway, what has been mentioned by our colleagues and what we were talking about and what we could to kind of clarify during the election or pre-election campaign. This local election campaign actually took place in the rather new conditions. On the one hand, reform and decentralization, on the other hand, a new election legislation which created diverse challenges regarding different, let's say, the groups and special teams, new amalgamated territorial groups, and actually where we actually had those places where we had about 10,000 that up to 10,000. After that, we had absolutely different actual conditions. We can actually remind you about the reform of the administrative territorial reform. They canceled the rayons or districts, so to say. And during those consultations, which has been mentioned by our colleagues, actually, they were talking about this risk of the enhanced, let's say, partisanship, let's say, of those in those places, and some of the settlements were not enough represented in the new formed, let's say, councils, radas, local radas, and the increased corruption. Why? Because those parties did not have their special, let's say, party groups or cells, let's say, and they had to cooperate with the regional ones, those who were on the list of those to be candidates to be elected. And that was a special, let's say, situation when the efforts did not reflect the real situation in the localities. We actually registered very bad situations, which was associated with the hatred, let's say, and enmity. And the progress of the political parties, we could see those only when we were in the end stage of our consultation. But if you take the whole Ukraine, where actually they copied each other's political party programs, let's say from the eastern parts or southern part of Ukraine, and so they actually mention, let's say, clearly the issue of the historical memory of this party, not directly, let's say, but they actually read the issue of the communization and the issue of the languages. And actually that was also mentioned by our expert that not only we are talking about the issue of the local development, let's say the construction of building of the roads or the communication lines, but the local important issues would be the specific issues of the focus issues of the work of the newly formed councils. Maybe we can talk about some exotic coalitions formation on the level of the local councils. And one of another trends, let's say, they mentioned the influence of very different groups at the level of the local communities on those electoral party race or election races or pre-election race. For example, if a specific town has a big enterprise, which is kind of town forming one in its scale, its production of prevention, they actually use this possibility. It's good if those interests of the business groups coincide today, at least partial, with the ideas of integration of the country. But if tomorrow there will be no such coincidence, and there will be some kind of the local introduction of such or individual projects would be really very complex, complicated, and risky ones. And there is kind of, we are going to talk about the lack of the political pluralism. There were some trends level different cities of some regional parties, not to the all national parties, all Ukraine parties. So we are talking about regional projects when the local business elites, especially the level of the municipal councils, if you are talking about the town chairman, head persons, and they actually demonstrate the trends towards some kind of conservation. The lack in this, I'm talking about the conservation of the local elites, local interests, and the lack or absence of those possible unifying or uniting links or ties between different groups. Our experts actually indicated to that fact, or this fact, and they were offering different medicines which could, let's say, remedy the situation. But in my opinion, those medicines won't be really helpful under the available conditions, because those medicines should be taken for a long time. and in let's say sufficient quantity. Well, if I miss something, we can supplement it later. So I'm not going to be original in my talking, but we have some critical thinking, economical, social programs, regional cooperation. I'm talking about some joint infrastructure project, the issue which is associated also with the joint information projects. We should not focus our attention or their attention only on the level of some local communities or regions. It should be broadened further on. There are some specific features if we are talking about the party's historical memory. Again, here we have to communicate more and better between different regions if we are talking about the specific features of this kind of regulation without objecting but trying to explain the differences. If you are talking about the next Lugansk regions where there were no elections in 17 or 18 communities, our colleagues from the eastern region, generally speaking, they regarded this kind of discriminative decision taken because there were actually they had the preliminary election of the presidential elections, etc., etc. They said why we should not have the same in the local level. So maybe I will supplement what I said later. Thank you, Yulia. A lot of questions actually were provoked by your presentation because this issue, many of the issues you touched upon demand further investigation. Maybe Zolkina will clarify some of those things. She represents the organization, the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiative Foundation, which has a lot of possible opportunities in this country. So you have the floor. Thank you. I would put it this way. Those elections, first of all, they already opened, well, I hope, a new cycle of development of the political culture of Ukrainians, because on the one hand, the reform decentralization which just started, it hasn't been completed. On the other hand, it only requires some legislative transformations and amendments which already have taken place. But at the local level, we need some kind of the comprehension of the transformation changes, which are, let's say, the possibilities which have to be delegated from the regional or even national level to the local level. And of course, there are a lot of risks for the local elites after those elections, because they can't understand what kind of financial or associative instruments will be concentrated on the local level. As for the communities which were active in the elections, they did not yet understand those tools and instruments, and which is understandable, because how to use such instruments of the financial decentralization, this understand that doesn't come immediately. You need maybe 3 to 4 years for the community to comprehend who should be responsible, let's say, for the uncomfortable life at the local level, and to stop to accuse everybody who is then satiated from them on the regional level, even in Kyiv. So they have to understand that their authorities are here and in their locality, and all the questions should be addressed specifically there. Sociological studies demonstrated that the activity on the local level, unfortunately, is not that high which it should have been. And the risky situation was that, on the one hand, the citizens mostly knew, the majority of the citizens were aware of, let's say, different reasons what pertains to the control of the, let's say, the power that be authorities, but they consciously were not involved. They were not thinking what kind of inquiry should be sent. They could work in the non-formal, let's say, units or, let's say, associations of different citizens and influence the authorities of the power that be in this way. But they thought that in principle they should be involved in that. And I believe that the last elections must bring about a new trend, which at the local level they will have to understand that specifically to local authorities, they will realize, implement, or resolve those problems, which previously the local communities didn't even understand that they could do. But the risk is that those who were elected to the local authorities, they clearly understood the mechanisms which are associated with the local authorities. And we can actually foresee, I'm not talking about the big cities, but specifically about small communities, newly formed communities in the regional level. In the next 1 or 2 years, we are going to have some kind of disappointment where they will not cope with the financial mechanism or do that in the way the local people expect them to do, and they expect the best possible ways how the local authorities could improve their level of living. And then we'll have a lot of claims to the partisanship of the elections, etc., etc. In Ukraine, traditionally, in many rayons, not districts, not regions or macro regions, in many districts, the confidence in the local authorities traditionally was much higher than confidence in or trust to the central authority. First, the national authorities have a lot of credit of confidence or trust. And then it decreases. The only exception is President Zelensky, who still has quite a high level of confidence. One more important aspect or trend of this local campaign, of course, this is the interference in the election process, the idea of the so-called polling on the part of the president. What was kind of mobilization of his own let's say, constituency or electorate, actually was a kind of separating action, and we now have a clear picture how the servant of the People Party actually they used for their let's say benefit this kind of the polling, and at the same time the supporters of other party, for example, the European Solidarity Party, they did not participate mostly in this polling. And this is something which should not be the case when the task is allegedly to find out what the local people think, So even we could avoid that if we could, let's say, actually do this polling by a central election committee or some other body of the national authority, etc., if they wanted to do that. So speaking about the expectations of the transformation changes in our attitude towards the future, those people who came to the polling stations and gave their votes, they associate the elections with the aspirations, or let's say the expectation that the situation will improve, or is going to improve. Only 36% of those who voted at the polling station, they believe that the situation is not going to change, and the elections will not end in any kind of the transformation elections. But those who did not come to the polling station, did not vote, the proportion is quite absolutely opposite. 75% of the people they believe that the situation will not change for the better, and they remain as it is now. So we have a situation where for some category of the citizens, elections is kind of mechanism to somehow impact the situation, and they try to link their aspiration that this will bring some positive changes. In the other category, they actually believe that this has no prospects, no perspective. They have to be distantiated from this process. So I'm coming to the end of my input, and this we are now faced the traditional choice, kind of the hope for some kind of collective social feeling in the sense of some kind of anxiety, and we can see that, and within the framework of the election campaign, this demonstrated once again that those who selected, not to come to the polling stations, and this category of the citizens actually overweighs the feeling of the anxiety or the or alarm, and they believe that most of citizens have this feeling, the overwhelming feeling in this country, and in this category. Those who voted, we can talk about two parts. Those who have some kind of the anxious thought, or the thought associated with some kind of disappointment and anxiety and some negative expectations, but 44% they do hope that the situation in the country will change for the better, and they actually link their hopes with the future of the country. So that's it. And this note about the hope, I'm going to end my input. Thank you very much. And those who follow us attentively in online, Olga Aivazovska, the head of the OPORA civic platform and civic network. Your turn, Olga. Thank you very much. Could you please put me a question for me to make my task easier? To put your question is always a very difficult task. But what I would tell you, the title of this discussion, the local pre-election race 2020, and the lessons for the unity and the stability in the country. So I have two questions. What role in strengthening, maybe in the threat to national unity can be brought by the local elections and the form it takes place in this country? And number two, if we accept this word trend, do we have new brands among the new trends? Thank you very much for your questions. First, the elections are associated with some kind of conflict. Then to say that the elections will promote the unity inside the country. If you take the results of the previous presidential and rather elections. So in the last elections, 271,000 electors took place, and everybody expressed his own morale and their specific respect to the law. So I witnessed not only very healthy competition between the candidates of different political parties, but rather harsh, let's say, combatant, let's say. Sometimes it had some kind of even aspects or sign of the criminal actions. I'm talking about the different participants in the same list of the candidates. So let's proceed from the presumption that the elections will not promote the unity, because they base their actions on different kind of counter actions. They have to somehow to break down or to divide their own and somebody else's, candidates. And again, this has some kind of ambiguous format. If we are talking about the kind of polling on the part of president mentioned by the previous speaker here, if we are talking about the press, we can actually talk about some controversy between the local political projects and parties, which were required as the legal entities, required by the local elites, which did not find the understanding between the well-known parliamentary political forces. This was associated with the fact that the implementation of some kind of the legislation, imperative plan, the May date, which starts to work rather aggressively 1 year and before, so it was much easier for them to find their own person of this or not political party, or use the French's approach, political party which would be bought, let's say, by a certain political group at the local level, but this political force in the central level will have nothing to do to already elected local members of the local councils or the local mayors. So again, we are talking about some controversial discussion with the central party or the central authorities of those elites. So very often those parties had very high level of the support of their constituencies because starting from 2015, they based their activities on the, let's say, the conflict with the president, with the office of the president of the parliamentary political force, creating the understanding with the elections, negative, let's say, attitude toward the others entities which mentioned before. Yeah, I'm talking first of all about the big communities, about certain political centers, regional centers, oblast centers, etc. If somebody said that this campaign was absolutely emotionally equal, again, taking into consideration some specificities or specific features of different elections built on the ideology of the parties, they used in certain questions the ideology to strengthen their own position and their statement that we won in this regional level of Ukraine, or we won all the mandates to this or another council. This testifies to the fact that we can talk about some kind of even deviation, which is not the best instrument to be or a tool for the country nowadays. And this is kind of partial effect of decentralization, which made it possible to increase the local budgets. And over the few last years, they allowed them to somehow to build their course of political struggle. The only thing which they could not foresee, the formula of the direct, let's say, proposing this or not candidature, because they used the new election campaign just a very short time before the elections. Our conclusions are as follows: that was competitive, but not always. This competition has some kind of legitimate character in some localities. For example, in the Donetsk region, there are 3 problematic small communities which are associated with the land resources, which are very expensive, close to the sea, and they use all kinds of illegal, let's say, interference with the election process over the last few years. They actually just changed the registration of the electorate in order to increase capital of this or another group. They use another approach with the same purpose. We could talk about some cases when the territorial election commission did not take care of all the necessary procedures to have the real results, but they actually announced this or another chairperson has been elected even before all the protocols has been approved and sealed regarding the specific locality, and this is subject to investigation not only in the part of the national police, but also in this case on the part of the SBU, or Security Service Secretariat. You have 1 minute. Another trend which demonstrates non-exception of this election reform. In some small communities, when some of the part of the communities did not agree to be part of the bigger community, territorial community, and they actually had their own elections. And again, this is subject to criminal responsibility, those who will be charged with this, or let's say convicted of this, could be sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. Unfortunately, we as experts, as media, sometimes we do not have an access to all the results of the elections, despite the fact that on the site of the Central Election Committee actually cannot see those, and we have to study each community, each process individually. Thank you for your very apt observations and the prospects lying behind those things. Thank you, Olga Aivazovska. Now we'll try to even more focus on the local level. We must have Oksana Yakovets, who is the counselor on the issues of social cohesion in the Lviv region. So maybe Oksana can tell us the results or the conclusions regarding the results of the elections in the Lviv region. You have 3 minutes at your disposal, Oksana. So far we do not have Oksana online, but we hope she's going to join us rather soon. Next, we have Andriy Magera, ex-deputy chairperson. Do we have Oksana? Well, I just wanted to say that if he's going to join us later, I just wanted to say the ex-deputy chairperson of the Central Election Committee in a very responsible time. Maybe now we can have Wilfried Ilge, associated member of the National Council of International Relations, member of the strategic group Key States within the framework of the project Strategies of European Neighborhood of the Bertelsmann Foundation. Sometimes it's very important to understand somebody else's opinion, not from inside, from outside. You have 7 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I hope that they can hear or listen to me and can hear me. Yes, they do. Thank you very much for the invitation extended to me. A lot has been said already, and I agree with many things which I heard, what the previous colleagues and speakers are talking about. I just would like to emphasize some things, since in this project I do with Donbass, I would like to draw attention, first of all, to the observations regarding the eastern parts of Ukraine. Also, I would like to once again emphasize that such elections were in a separate context. First time we had the partisanship of those elections of party-based, and the electoral law was not really very successful when they adopted that just before the start of the elections, and we can see that the people found a lot of difficulties to understand what is what in what pertains to open lists, which I would not even call the open list, because we know that there are some norms in the effective law. It was very difficult to support local candidates, and sometimes they did not fully understand what they could do with those open lists, or what they did with open lists. So we can see that the tendency or trend in the Donbass, that the departization placed in the hands of the powerful representatives. I would like to call them cooperative conglomerates. Those are also the projects behind which we can see one of the most powerful clan project, like Order, our Kramatorsk, some other, who on the whole actually represent some kind of cooperative conglomerate. Although people in the Kabmin may be thinking that this is a new alternative in place. So a new political landscape was not tuned to this kind of departization, because they did not have time enough to inform sufficiently the people in localities. In my opinion, we are dealing with very big manipulative factors. Also, I would like to remind you that one of the signs of political culture of Donbass, actually, and this is specifically political culture kind of factor. What I mean to say, for example, in Rubizhno we have very interesting results where the whole presidential party, Servant of the People, conventionally speaking, they came out of those elections with a good result. If we are talking about the list, you're talking about the Zarya factor, which was absolutely under control of Mr. Boyko. And here the people demonstrated they really wanted more alternative, but because of through those manipulations of political brands and manipulation with the list, maybe they are not illegal, but they are manipulative anyway. And so some of them lost their positions. On the other hand, there is a positive factor that there was not a single leader in this, and this is a progressive step forward. And maybe now we have some kind of a different competition. Small parties, including, for example, the teams of activists who actually went to the Servant of the People in Slavyansk, a new kind of alternative. This is positive. And this is positive in the smaller and the medium-sized cities. When independent candidates became winners in the elections of mayors, and some parties, smaller parties, had the success, met with the success of some specific localities. That again testifies to the fact that we don't have one monolithic force. At least we have some kind of competition between the, let's say, the followers of the old party approach, which actually offers some kind of control among the political elite. If we are talking about the unification or unity of the country, we also observe some kind of decentralization trends or tendencies. And not only we are talking about the East and the West, this is the trend to decentralize in the regional level. So they will require a lot from a president to try and find the way of communication on the local level if he wants to efficiently rule, let's say in a good sense of that, the country in the future. Maybe we're talking here about some kind of missed chances to establish communication with the regions, though this president started back in 2019 with a high level of trust towards him, or confidence in him in all the regions of Ukraine. I also would like to emphasize the problem that the elections did not take place in 18 local communities in Donbass. I would like you to understand me correctly. I understand that we have to take into consideration the factor of security and safety during the elections. This is a legitimate idea and approach. I do not object to that. But if we are talking about the, let's say, removal, let's say, rejection of the constitutional rights, which is not based on the transparent constitutional collegial decision, and we could observe that in the communities in Severodonetsk, for example, or Lysychansk, where in 2015 the local elections took place, though the security situation was much worse, I would say, in those days, and this actually slows down the development of democratic political competition. This slows down the participation of the local citizens forming new communities, new authorities, and the decentralization actually approach. And we could see that in many cases. And this Siemens, the old, let's say, situation. You have one more minute. This is a big mistake, and apart from the this kind of polling, the part of the president. So I believe that one of the big problems for Ukraine, for the decentralization of Ukraine, I'm talking about ignoring the process of the what happens at the local level, and this has been ignored by these central authorities. Thank you very much for your very specific and concrete examples. Do we have Oksana, Yakovets, or Mr. Magera? Not yet. Okay. In this case, actually, I would like to offer you some kind of a rounder. The coordinator of the working group started our discussion. I also would like to come back to that. The coordinator of the working group, Oleg Saakyan, and coordinator of the dialogue about peace and the safe reintegration, national platform. And that means that this platform pays attention to the gender equality as well. And we try to do the same here. But not always actually everything happens as has been planned. For example, we planned polling the name of the president. I actually expected somebody would approach me and ask me some question about that, and I would answer them. But unfortunately, this was not the case. Oleg, you have the floor. You know what's surprising about this polling? They actually mobilized both categories, loyal and unloyal to the president, to come to participate in the elections. So it's really a very ambiguous decision. But anyway, I'm going to base on the Olga's thesis that the elections are always an element of conflict and confrontation of different groups, different ideologies and interests. And in themselves, those moments can be very well visible, what we have here, for decentralizing forces in order to ensure the integration of reintegration of the country in non-stop mode. And today, under the conditions of the number of different challenges which are faced not only by Ukraine, but actually the whole world actually enters the period of turbulence. We were talking about some kind of the scientific products of the last decade or even several decades. And one of the key requirements today in many countries is the search for those tools and instruments which can ensure the kind of decentralizing forces. In Ukraine, we are thinking about that as well, and that bringing about the concept of the safe reintegration, which is one of the answers how we can actually ensure those decentralizing forces under the conditions of war, of the integration, and etc. And definitely during those elections, we could see the difference from the last year's presidential elections, and the factor of Corona-19 virus affected, let's say, this, and we were really badly surprised. But sometimes it was kind of shocking for the experts who deal all the time with elections, and they went through many cycles of elections. We actually witnessed some kind of apathy and degradation of the political elite, and a lot of disappointment in the political elites. And we could see this, let's say, disappointment on the part of different political forces. Again, we've had the case of who used the right of the winner. Now we have kind of the interlayers of different forces which became today the key players of this election campaign. What is interesting here, that the majority of them actually were formed and a group from the original elites, and actually fell out from the political elite, which found themselves in the extreme niches, geographical, territorial, or let's say political. And we could see a big conflict level in those niches in the east part of Ukraine, in the west of Ukraine, which are traditional ideological niches. When the mentality of the so-called grab mentality start to dominate, we could see a lot of different projects which could start to compete with each other in those niches. We could see that in Odessa, in the east, around the chair of the mayor in Lviv, the city of Lviv, in different regions. And in fact, in this way, we can see that the next electoral cycle was, let's say, big chance of that. This will be no less of the naturalism. Maybe some of the political forces will try to monopolize the votes of the Bessarabia, Donbass, or Lviv region, Polisia area, or some kind of other macro-regional vote or voice, and this will increase the force of the local feudals. And here we can see the formation of those local elites, which will much actually determine what is going to happen, because some of the mayor's elections, they demonstrated when they actually invested into the infrastructure, let's say in building the roads, which is understandable to the local people, they would actually, there would be no competition. There would no longer competitive conditions for other candidates. So if we can talk about that, we can change the situation, we can come up with the strengths in those process. Maybe this would be a painful evolution, but it will be evolution. In this way, we can see some kind of transition towards more higher democratization, plurality in the local level, then democratization. So they come down to the level of local level. Specifically there, we are going to have some kind of an understanding of reality, of real political life, maybe in one or two electoral cycle, given we have a normal situation. This will produce a normal fruit, because today decentralization took place in the absence in the most parts of Ukraine of real self-governments, because they still were reigned by the old, let's say, understanding the order and the governance, let's say. I agree with Ms. Zolkina, we need some kind of this kind of changes. If you're talking about information, we have to inform each and every one, citizens of Ukraine, how those powers, authorities are being distributed to the Ukraine, who they have to address, to demand from who, what from. This is not specific persons. They can bring to the national awareness, so that each citizen in the country has this knowledge and comprehension. We can even now I witness some of the amendments in the strategy of national development for 2021-27, which includes one of the three key goals: cohesion of the country, structural, cultural, humanistic, etc. If you're talking about those strategies, this kind of the homework, let's say, and if you're talking about the integral practices, in order that everybody could work for that, and the whole under the mode of default in this kind of programmed mode, unfortunately, those things have not developed yet, and our communication showed that there is a big requirement for cooperation, inter-regional cooperation. I mean, different practices and the authorities, the awareness campaign, etc. Maybe some kind of counteraction to on the part of the government to contribute to kind of the separation of different forces. We could see that if you're talking about some ideological and other extremities, we were talking about some kind of, let's say, the value, historical values, let's say. It was very difficult to do within the local community, because very broad, let's say, brushwork, let's say, or touches were not enough. We could witness also on part of the key political parties some kind of on the were selling their brands, when the same local group, they would bring their people under the brands of different political forces. Under such conditions, those ideological markers, they played less role, and they were used to less extent. When the brothers go from three different parties, a known case when a wife, for example, it presents one political force and the husband another. Those ideological markers in this case are not seriously perceived even by the voters themselves. Speaking about other trends, 20 seconds, okay? Fragmentation of the national policy takes place because of the failure of the central efforts, and that's why there's lack of understanding of their positioning of their own political force. This shows that the task faced by the central authority and how to concentrate and to work, how to work for the national cohesion, those efforts must be enhanced, and they must have more attention towards it and more priority, and then that's what declared president. And now those words must be transformed into some specific mechanism, some concrete programs and steps. Again, if you're talking about the implementation of the part of local players who become a very important factor in the political life of Ukraine. Thank you. I'd like to address the organizers. When Oksana, let's say, Yakovets and Andriy Magera will be online, let us know. I have a question which I would like to address to Yulia Tyshchenko and Oleg Saakyan, also the participants of our discussion would like to participate in that. When we're talking about the regional influence groups, which in some cities and some localities actually want the power. You can use different, let's say, words. If in some macro regions we have some kind of the leagues of Burundi. If you're talking about some feudal terminology of Oleg Saakyan, how powerful they could be in the same confrontation with, for example, Kiev. Thank you very much for your question. By the way, early and today, this risk exists, and I believe it did not disappear, and maybe it will be further developed, because not everywhere the situation will be the same, but anyway. And also, when we are talking about, let's say, the amalgamated territorial communities, this kind of barren ship, I don't know. Actually, we have also taken consideration the land reform, actually. This is kind of additional factor which even makes the price of this question even higher. So the requirements or the desires of some kind of deformations of the regional forces, whether they all participate in the division of the monopoly, we have to take this kind of land issue as well. Well, generally speaking, life is a conflict. So if we're talking about the regional conflict, this could become the field for the development or the change of some kind of entity or the essence, or could lead to some kind of degradation. So this is a kind of challenge for all of us, how we can find a way out of the conflict, what we need to do that. Are there any real interests of the different conflicting parties, whether they really realize those, and whether they actually want to speak about their interests. Because in addition to those regional, local formations, or the parties, not all of them, but this is kind of ideological polarization where it was perceived, I don't know, well, as a kind of the continuation of the all Ukrainian, let's say, some kind of crusade. Well, again, we are using this kind of feudal terminology, barons or crusades, whatever. But again, if you're talking about the percentage of those who voted, which was mentioned. At the level of the big cities, I believe, it seems to me, the risk of coronavirus actually was detrimental and actually affected the number of the people. I don't have specific figures or percentages how many people did not participate in the elections. But again, in Kyiv, I can say that I understand that local elections are not very popular, but they could be popular when they did not coincide with some other, let's say, elections in Ukraine. In time. So coming back to your question, there is some risk in the countryside, in the rural areas, and in some big industrial cities, for example, when there is an opportunity and possibility to control all this. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we should talk not so much about the reality of the self-governance, and rather we have to try to find out the real interests of the parties involved and their capability to communicate, to come to agreement with the local authorities, with the central authorities. Everybody remembers the Congress in Donetsk, yeah? Some kind of metaphorical comparison maybe on my part, but I hope that we won't have this kind of let's say a confrontation any longer. Well, maybe everybody, maybe not everybody remembers that, but in addition to Congress in Severodonetsk, not in Severodonetsk, there was another Congress in Kharkiv. Not always we talk about that, we remember that. Okay, I believe that Mr. Magera is already ready to join us, but before that, I would like to give floor to Oleg Saakyan to speak up his mind on this topic. Well, for example, the project of the mayor's party has not been formally implemented, but it can be realized owing to the victory or expectation of the victory in the big cities of those people who, speaking in principle, were regarded as one of the leading figures in the mayor's party. Very interesting. I would answer first about your first question. Confrontation is very useful when you're protesting against center, when you have the upcoming or forthcoming elections, when the elections are already behind that. This is something different. So the nature of politics in such oligarch countries ours lies in the plane of how to come to some consent. So we are talking about the actions we are going to use in order to come some kind of consent. And then the party of the mayors, as a means of some kind of cohesion, of some equal participants, not decentralized. They had some edge before the elections. And all experts said that for the people, this is not understandable. They elect this and a mayor, specific mayor. You have to vote for your mayor, so to say. But on the other hand, we have a situation when the kind of the practice of agreement, they will become just the starting or launching pad in order to, let's say, to cut the consent later. If we are talking about oligarch groups, given all their vices and non-democratic, let's say, signs, they are a factor of unity, because the factor, if we are talking about some kind of the field approach, they are very interested in the development of the power sector, grain sector, and this actually includes within the framework of the regions or the local communities. So they're not interested to lose their position there. And the factor of this, even if you're talking about mayors of the big cities, they are not so much autonomous. If we had a very big middle class, maybe some mayor of this or another middle-sized cities could say, well, I don't care what happens in Kyiv. We are self-proficient and self-supporting. So, but this is what we like now in the local communities. Plus, COVID virus factor, which changes the different orientations. And this is already form building if you're talking about the politics. So we should expect some other reality political for several months now, and we could have witnessed the evaluation of what we used to talk about as evaluated, and maybe some kind of the changes of the rules of the game. Thank you. We are going to continue our trend to use the historical terms. The picture which was depicted by Oleg Saakyan had a very big middle class V, actually. This led to some kind of gangster league, and not the League of Barons. Now, Andriy Magera, in a very responsible period of time, he was the deputy chairman of the Central Election Committee. Mr. Magera, we have a 7-minute time limit. Everybody actually extends to 8 minutes, so we have 7 minutes to talk about the storage of the country, about what pertains to the election campaign, as results that are negative and positive. I believe there is a negative tradition in the country when we all the time change the election legislation and election code before the new elections. This was the case again. Actually, it acquired some kind of the distorted forms. In December last year, they changed the election code, which was introduced within 4 days. And in July of this year, they actually made the radical changes, transformation this legislation. And 2 months later, the parliament decided to change their attitude towards that. Just to give you an example, for example, they had to provide the information that they have never been on the criminal record. But again, in September, the parliament then decided that they do not need this kind of written information. But I would like to mention some more important things. Unfortunately, this kind of partization of the local self-governments actually acquired very bad forms. We shouldn't forget that the local elections, this is not the elections to the national authorities. We are talking about the local authorities, representative authorities. If you're talking about the legislative, let's say, the executive and the judicial powers, those are the branches of one the same trees. In the local level, those are the branches not of the same tree. They work in the same field, but it's a different tree with different interests, and the territorial communities must be more interested in the issues of communal utilities, let's say transport, communication, and more, let's say, ground level issues. And when the legislator let's say, imposes on the political parties, and they canonize the political party with the right to come with the candidates to be elected. This is not this is an abnormal situation. Why it's not normal? Because for the first time over the last many years, the elections to the village councils takes place on the, let's say, on the proportional system. So far, I couldn't find any kind of similar examples in Europe, in the rest of Europe. This could actually lead, and it leads to the following, and we shouldn't be surprised. If we're talking about some utilities or some other local issues, how many wars should be in Ukraine? What must be, let's say, the foreign relations of Ukraine? What country should be friends with, which not? So we are talking about the partization of the local council multiplied by the imperative mandate. This is another rudiment, let's say, which we inherited from the communist times, and they all the time they offer us to introduce into the election law. Independence of autonomous nature of local authorities actually brings about some kind of fear, let's say, among some people. Yeah, well, somebody said that this project of the mayor's party did not justify itself. I don't think it's true. I believe that they have future, and the electoral results show that, and I believe maybe during the next election campaign, this party could become stronger and have some of their own ideology. And it's true that some of the people do not have their own ideologies. Previously, only Communist Party and Svoboda Party had their ideologies, but other parties have for all the good against all the bad, so to say. And the parliamentary, elections will we will contribute to the development of such parliament, but if you're talking about the local elections, the election legislation is very, is not consistent. It's a kind of contradictory, and I believe that this specific election campaign was rather dirty, so to say, as compared to the previous elections in Ukraine. For example, in this year, 2020, the money was the same situation past, and emphasize the situation is absolutely similar. Well, I remain to be an optimist, but anyway, we have to understand that if we're talking about the election, we have to, the real experts should work with the election legislation, those who already have the experience on that. We just deceive ourselves. People have some physiological needs to eat from time to time. They have to sleep from time to time. They cannot work 72 hours without any break. And again, we have to talk about the protection of the election ballots and the documents. We have to think and work in order to avoid some kind of abuse, any kind of abuse with that. Thank you, Andriy, for your realistic optimism, which everybody could feel here, those who listen to you. Olga, Aivazovska would like to step in, answering one of the previous questions. Please, Olga. Well, actually, I wanted to voice here the thought about the number of the people who participate in the voting and the problems which could appear when somebody came to the power or captured the power. If we are talking about the legal coming to power, we are talking about the coming to power. If we're talking about the capture of the power of the authorities, we can talk about some smaller communities, which I mentioned before, when they had their own elections. But the problem lies in different plane. There must be respect on the part of the national authorities to work based on the efficient and high quality legislation. If you're talking about some kind of, they must have some answers to the questions. For example, the powers of the local councils, not before the results are declared or made public, but before that. There'll be no feudalization if the law enforcement and the judicial branch should be efficiently working. We need to have some kind of constraining, and actually there must be some kind of the punishment for the violation of legislation, even if somebody doesn't like it. If we're talking about the federalization, only the open judicial branch of power can stop that. And actually, we're talking about the latest rulings of the Constitutional Court. We're talking about some electronic declarations which had to be submitted by the certain persons. When we have transparent and open judicial branch of power, there will be no federalization. We won't be able to imagine that. I disagree with Andriy that Andriy Magera that the different courts passed controversial decisions or rulings on the same situation. If we're talking about the Kyiv Court of Appeal, when one collegium passes one ruling and other, let's say, collegium passes different decisions. So there will be a lot of cases like that. So we are again talking about the judicial branch of power. So I would like to insist that experts do not have the right to manipulate or politicize the number of the people who came to the polling stations, and why they did not actually publicize the rating group results. They did that after elections, not pre-elections. The 19% did not participate because they reside not at the place where they are registered. 50% of the citizens said that they had more important things to take care of. 14% answered the question why they did not participate in the voting. They did not know who to choose from which candidates. They didn't know any of those. Plus 20% also were sick, and 10 more percent they were afraid of the COVID virus risk. And again, 20%, you know, they kind of separated 20% of those who did not participate in the voting because of being sick or ill, and 10 more because they were afraid of COVID virus. So I would like to we're talking about the reasons. We have to investigate into the roots of those reasons, but we cannot make the conclusion. But the people, if they did not come to the polling stations, they were voting somebody. No, you know, in some other countries, developed countries, in the United States, it could be 30%, 20-something% in different states of that country, and all the way to the European continent, in Great Britain, when they, let's say, 36-40% level of those who voted. I am talking about the elections which took place before the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, if you can talk about those who physically came to the polling station, those who actually send or use the mail or email to vote for that. We also have to take that into consideration. Thank you very much for a very interesting observations. We actually, if we are talking about those people who did not come to the polling station, who did not vote, and this is one study, but didn't hear a word about those white people voted. It would be very interesting. So we still have some time left. Maybe there's some questions from the audience, or maybe Andriy Magera would like to say something because he still has some minutes in his disposal. So my question is, do we have Oksana Yakovets? Oh yeah, good afternoon. Yes, I'm here. I'm with you. Wonderful, Oksana. You have 3, okay, let's put 4 minutes in order to impress us with an example of social cohesion in the Lviv region in the context of elections. Thank you very much. Those would be my personal observations regarding the election process in the local level in the Lviv region. First of all, the intense criticism of the the People Party by other participants of this process. So everything boiled down to the following. There was kind of, I would say, wave of all kind of negative, and this was something, he did something wrong, he scratched his head or whatever, or he looked in different way or something like that, you know. People, you know, either responded or reacted to that or not. So, and accordingly, we have the following rating. A very ridiculous, not to say grievous, let's say. What we have today, when they already, let's say, process more than 20%, let's say 30% in the regions on the ballots. We have the emergence or appearance of new faces at the level of the amalgamated territorial communities in the region, generally speaking. Well, this, taking into consideration, this is absolutely new division of the Lviv region. We have 7 districts. We have Lviv district, which have never been the case. We also have COVID-19, and Lviv region leads in the top of the list of the situations of our local healthcare committee does not agree with that. We have dependence on the mass media of the local communication system regarding the information which was actually spilled, and again, kind of the competition between different entities, who is better, who is not. And the previous results of the elections demonstrated that the general vector has not been changed if you're talking about the voters in the Lviv region and the Lviv district, now new district. They are directed towards European integration, and without any compromise, they support the position of offering resistance to the aggressor in Ukraine. So 2 leading parties are European Solidarity and Samopomich, which actually their position. Actually, they base themselves on this vector of development of the country as a whole and the region specifically talking. What would please me that, I don't know whether this is panacea of all our misfortunes, but what pleases me, gender quota. Many females decided to embark upon the road of, let's say, becoming a politician. Let's say maybe that was kind of their civic position. Maybe there was some kind of love to this or another political grouping. But many rather strong and powerful ladies actually decided to try and let's say participate in those elections. Well, anyway, they participated for this or another reason, and today, at least, I know that part of them they will become the MPs of this or another council, deputies, whether district or regional ones. Those are my observations, but generally speaking, I would like to say that the process of decentralization, in fact, this is a very complex one, and not everybody understands that completely. They were talking, and trying to organize the amalgamated territorial communities. They did not understand what kind of responsibility they're going to shoulder, social sense or territorial sense. I'm not talking about, let's say, the roads or the road lighting. And first of all, the land. We have to understand that the community, first of all, means people. And I understand that because I worked in the social sphere, but not all the candidates or the, let's say, the chairman who are now chairman, the Yakovets, so to say, chairman who worked with, in that capacity for a long time, not all of them understand that. Thank you, Oksana, for your observations, local observations, and the picture you actually depicted. And by the way, when you mentioned Samopomich, maybe I will put the last question of mine, because we almost exhausted our time at our disposal. I would like to address that to Oleg, Saakyan, and Yulia Tyshchenko, and all other participants in our discussions who would like to answer this question. Actually, we mentioned that the so-called regional parties. I would like to put, for instance, in both words, they do not have any prospects to become general Ukrainian ones. But we have an example when the general acceptance national Ukrainian became the regional one. I'm talking about Samopomich. Speaking about Ukraine, what this proves, how long it can actually take place in Ukraine, what it can bring about in Ukraine. For example, Udar party. Well, actually, I cannot say that all the national or regional parties have been affected. We have seen a lot of times rebranding when the same leaders actually were standing on different banners and different projects. If you're talking with national forces, which came down to the regional level, they localize in their rhetorics and their behavior, position, etc. Yeah, there is kind of what they call the one-way pass, so to say. If the leader actually decided to distanciate himself, for example, if you're talking about the Samopovich, given some manipulations, there could be some kind of the way outs. We have the examples of Poroshenko, other elector who went to some electoral header, and again the association with the leaders become one of the key obstacles on the way of increasing the social electoral basis for the political force under conditions of the Ukrainian political projects when they are, let's say, rotating around this or that political figure. Maybe this would become, in the long-term perspective, some kind of the, let's say, sentence to this or another party. This is sociological conclusion. Yulia, thank you. What you are talking about, first of all, we can talk about the leader-type party. For example, the first chance to be all Ukrainian development of the internal party democracy and the attraction of resources. And when I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about human resources as well. When they lost it, and the party actually is considered from the point of view of legislation as a certain platform, let's say, for or side for promotion of the election campaign. Yes, of course, rebranding is possible in such cases. We have about 300 parties, if not more. I just lost track of those. And from time to time, they are renamed, or let's say, or sold out. Yeah, but in this case, those are rather very sad stories, if you're talking about someone pomage. I'm not talking about, let's say, of changing the sides when members of one party become members of a different party, let's say. Let's call them some kind of ideological things, Golos, Voice, or Samopomage party. But the crisis today, if we're talking about some kind of stable political projects, which would have some kind of the obvious resource for their development, on the level of the Ukrainian level. I'm not talking about some parliamentary, not so much parliamentary forces. I'm talking about some others, yeah, because we are talking the crisis of political leadership. Despite the fact that we have new faces, and we have a lot of familiar faces who play their own political game, if we are talking about the unitary integration. But the proposals, the opposite proposals, unfortunately, they are not numerous. Thank you very much. Also, Wilfried, Ilge would like to say a few words before we close our discussion. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to offer you some remarks. A lot has been said already. In my opinion, the great weakness of the national parties, or certain national parties, lies in the fact that they are not prepared to further develop their success of their work with the active people in the local level. What Oleg mentioned is really very important. Political culture of something of the kind of agreement tools, so to say, so how to agree upon something with each other. They try to come to a consent. They try to come to agreement with big players for their kingdom or princedom, let's say. And in this case, if we follow to do that, we are going to just run in the close circle, and they will not have enough space for their further activities. Though I would like to emphasize that this again differs from region to region. In those regions, even where the small parties are ready to do something, they have some success. Though they do not have enough strength, they lack some, which is important, they lack some media spaces, and where they have enough space, media space, they can come up with wonderful proposals and or some kind of the implemented projects. And of course here, and this is a great danger, here we have to, again, given the new, we have to come up as an answer with a new, not with the new decentralization, but with new instruments will give more power to the local citizens for self-governance. Certain platforms, for example, now we have new competences in the sphere of education, so we have to provide the opportunity for them to be heard, and that they have to exercise control over the sources of, let's say, the activities of the committee. We have to finish decentralization based on certain standards which normally have the other countries. For example, today, not in all the cities they sufficiently regulate the issue whether the MP, on the one hand, be a member of the council, on the other hand, at the same time, he can be a director of this or another communal enterprise or utility enterprise. And this is a kind of a possibility for them to exercise control over the city, so to say. So we have to come up with some kind of balance between the using the right and the capabilities, abilities of the citizens on the one hand, and certain standards on the other hand. And a very short remark regarding, well, we have a kind of paradox here. I heard about that for a lot of times during the elections, not only now, but before as well. On the local level, people often think, in some cities as well, they think that they cannot change anything. But at the local level, mafioso structures are very visible. Let's say inter-economic movements, or some kind of fusion between police and the criminal forces. The people sometimes do not know their rights, how they can influence the regional local situations on the one hand. On the other hand, physically they really can visualize with their own eyes those groupings, and they could think, this is maybe not. This is not the bad situation we have now because of this kind of aggression. Maybe this will help us to do something better, to improve. We have to do something, I'm not going to try to depict some kind of fatal picture. Decentralization is a correct reform in Ukraine, but now we have to make or to take care of some kind of the finishing touches or to accept some finishing norms. And this must be understood also by the central authorities. They should not put their stakes on the princedom, but on some active people. Thank you. Thank you, Wilfried. Maybe there are some questions from the audience, but I can see in the chat there is something. Maybe there are some questions sent in by our audience, online audience. Maybe somebody can tell me, are there any questions in the chat room? None. Okay, perhaps not. Esteemed colleagues, actually, we even use more time than we planned to do. Number one, not because it's rather cold in this in this room, but because we heard quite a lot of very interesting ideas and thoughts of part of the participants, which deserves a round of applause. So this is the end of the first part of our discussion. We plan to have a break, but since we already used 9 of the 10 minutes of the break, so my proposal is maybe just we need some 5 minutes maybe. Okay, 7 minutes break. In 7 minutes we have to come back. We are going to have another part of the discussion with a different title. Elections are